There is nothing like having a pizza oven in your backyard, especially when it's attached to a nice big fireplace and a wood-fired grill, and especially when you've built it yourself. It's a magnet for friends. It's a good excuse to have a party, and it's just lovely to sit around at night with the family and a bottle of wine and just watch the fire. I would highly recommend doing it if you, and only if you, have 3 years to dedicate to researching, gathering the material, and really knowing what you're going to do before you get started, and then putting a huge amount of work into it. Hi, my name's Rich, and I just built, or I'm in the middle of building, a pizza oven in my backyard, and I got a great deal of information off of YouTube, and I thought I'd just put a YouTube video together to help out anybody who's planning on doing a pizza oven for themselves. There it is in the background. We're about halfway up the dome. But anyways, there's a lot of information that you need to understand and know prior to starting. And this video is going to show you some of the pitfalls, some of the requirements, some of the very important tools, some of the other things that you need to know before you start making your pizza oven and as you're making it. So I'm hoping this video will be fairly short. I don't want it to be one of those 20-minute jobs, but there is a lot of information to go through, so bear with me. Just another quick thing before I get started. I'm not an expert at this. This is the first time I've done it. I did some research on YouTube and online. There's some great resources, by the way, which I'll talk about later, to help you out. But I don't know what I'm doing. So if you find out that I've done some things wrong, or that there's some things that are maybe done not the way you would do them, by all means, let us know, let me know, let the people that are viewing this video know, because it's meant to be a tool to help people out, but not to slam me for my lack of knowledge. Thanks. So, the first thing you have to do, obviously, is dig yourself a little spot to put your pizza oven. In this case, I've put more than a pizza oven, as you probably saw in the original picture. Anyways, you're going to pour a concrete pad, so you need to put down some sonotubes and get some rebar and some various types of mesh that you might want to use, and then create yourself a little frame, or in this case 3 frames. So I chose to get a concrete truck to bring the concrete for this part of the job, just because I thought pouring that concrete would take way too long, pouring by hand. But here's a little tip. If you're going to do that, rather than get a dedicated truck to bring half a yard or whatever it is that you need, call them and find out if they're going to be in your area with a load that they could add a little bit extra to, and then they can just drop that little bit extra off at your house. It's way cheaper that way. That way they don't have to make a dedicated trip. Another thing I would do differently is I would make that pad a bit thicker. I've had no problems with it, but from what I've seen on YouTube since, that pad 4 inches is maybe not quite thick enough to take all that weight, and so I would make it a little bit thicker next time. So another good tip is, to take a couple of years before you start this project and just scour Kijiji for the material. I had to get a lot of brick and a lot of cinder blocks and just a lot of stuff that I would never have been able to afford to buy it brand new. I actually got a lot of the cinder block. I just happened to notice a big pile out behind somebody's shed, and it looked like it had been sitting there for a while type of thing. So I went and talked to the guy, and he was looking to get rid of it. He hadn't put it on Kijiji or anything, but he was wanting to get rid of it, and I just happened to snag it off him. So it's definitely worthwhile to keep your eye on Kijiji or whatever sort of marketplaces you have in your area, and just get used material. There's an unbelievable amount of used brick that people are just trying to get rid of, and if you happen to catch them at the right time, you're going to get yourself a really good deal. So the middle portion, the fireplace, and the left side, the wood-fired grill, both need to be lined with fire brick. So I've filled the voids in the cinder block on the bottom with sand, and eventually I'm going to line, you'll see I'll line the whole boxes. Both the middle and left side are going to be lined with fire brick. Anyways, it's the one on the right that's the pizza oven, and you can see I'm starting to frame up to pour the top on it. One thing I did do is I left all the holes in the brick empty, so that when I poured the concrete would go down and kind of lock the brick together. This thing's never going to, it's going to be there for the next 100 years, I guarantee you. We might get cracks in the brick here and there, but the structure itself is not going anywhere. Anyways, in order to pour the pad, you just need to make yourself a platform, and it has to be super level and whatnot. Notice that the bricks have come up a little bit above the level of the concrete just because I thought the concrete would help lock the bricks together. Obviously, you have to really support the whole thing from the bottom because there's an overhang. But however you make it, you need to make a platform. You need to pour yourself a platform, and I don't know anything about pouring concrete, so this is all kind of experimental to me. But I bought myself a mixer, and you can see we've thrown some rebar into there. And my wife and I did the pour one evening. We had to put a tarp over it because it got raining on us, or it started to rain shortly after we finished. But anyways, the next day, there it is, all nice and beautiful and ready to be made into a pizza oven. So before I did the pizza oven, I started to brick the outside of the whole structure. I wanted to make it look half decent. And then again, I got all that brick off of Kijiji. That brick was almost free, and I got enough, more than enough, to line the outside of this whole structure. So again, that just is a statement to how, if you pay attention, you can get yourself a really good deal on the brick. Brick is just something that people are trying to get rid of. You know, that whole patio was really cheap as well. I found a guy that had taken out a patio, and he had been sitting around for a long time. Just keep your eyes peeled, and you'll find a good deal. Anyway, I don't know how to lay brick, so this was all experimental as well. But just like anything, YouTube's your friend, and you can find 1,000 different YouTube videos on how to mix mortar and lay brick and whatnot. And it's kind of cathartic once you get into it. You know, I'd mix up a couple of batches of mortar a night and do a couple of courses. Just like anything, you know, it takes a lot of work, but when you do a lot of work and you get something accomplished, you give yourself something to be proud of. And so I had no problem doing it, and I'm really happy I did. But be prepared for a crap load of work, because man, I mean, I did all three of those different things as one unit, but there's still, it's, you know, 3 times the work. But again, it was worth it in the end, and I wouldn't probably do it again if I had to start over, but I'm glad I did it. Anyhow, you can see there's a layer of fire brick on the bottom of that. That's the grill that was supposed to be a smoker. I did a layer of fire brick on the bottom of the middle things, just a fireplace. And so we're lining both of those things with fire brick, just so that the heat doesn't get to the other bricks, the cinder blocks, just to stop cracking and whatnot. I wanted to get up to the edge or the top lip of the grill with my brickwork before I laid the concrete. And so we're just about ready to lay the concrete on the left side there. My daughter and I did that. You may notice a little black hole, sort of little black dot on the right wall of the grill section, and I'll talk about that later. That's just a vent. This is all the fire brick. That's not even all of it. There was even more of it. But I got another great Kijiji deal from a factory in town close to where I live, and I would not have been able to do this without Kijiji, because I wouldn't have been able to afford all the brick and all the material for it if I had to pay for it brand new. But anyways, so we're ready to start framing in the work surface. It's just a work surface around the outside of the grill. Again, that was supposed to be a smoker, but that didn't work out. There's another piece of machinery that just was invaluable for this whole project. Moving all that brick around with a wheelbarrow, forget it. Right in the middle of the screen there, you can see the vent pipe that comes from the smoker, or what was going to be the smoker. It sits in the middle of a fairly large void between the smoker and the fireplace section. That was filled with sand to support the vent, and then just avoid having to fill the whole thing with concrete. Anyways, we're starting to frame up the top of the smoker section just to provide a work surface and obviously keep the water out and just make it look half decent at the top. So my daughter and I poured another big slab of concrete. You can see the rebar going in there and everything. And that was just a brutal pour. It was a hot day. I didn't know enough, and still don't know enough, about pouring concrete, but at the time I didn't realize that you have to keep the concrete really moist on a hot day. It was just hardening way too fast, and it was just terrible. You know, it wouldn't have been that bad if I had known what I was doing, but I didn't, so that was the problem. But just like anything, live and learn, and you know, I got it done, and it's over with, and I'm happy with it. So both the right and left sections are now complete, and it's time to start building the pizza oven, which is obviously the whole point of this video. It's meant to kind of give you some instruction on how to go about doing that if you're interested in or planning to do it. So let's talk about some material right now. To do this project, you need some very specific materials that you can't just get anywhere because most places don't carry them because they're just not really in much demand. I will list off in the description all the things that I used and where I got them and where you might find them yourself. A grinder and several ceramic wheels, lots of them, indispensable for forming bricks, chipping concrete off, and just basically fixing up your mistakes when you make them. You definitely need a wet saw that's capable of cutting bricks. There were multiple hundreds, maybe even 1,000 or more cuts that I made, and I was going to rent one, but it would have cost me a fortune to rent it for the multiple days I would have needed it. So to buy one was way cheaper, and now I've got one, and I've used it since a bunch of times. Definitely buy one. Don't rent it. So you can't let the pizza oven get wet while you're building it because the floor of it, actually below the fire brick floor, is a layer of 2-inch fiberboard. That's it right there. And that stuff is super insulative, but if it gets wet, it takes forever to dry out and it loses its insulative quality eventually. So you just cannot let that get wet. So if you think about the shape of a dome, you realize that the bricks need to be cut in wedges, both horizontally and vertically, in order for them to fit together without too much gaps between them. And so originally I started by creating wedges. You can see them there. Layers of wedges. I was cutting bricks into wedge shapes and then making layers to create that wedge shape. But eventually I got smart and realized that you might as well just cut the bricks into wedge shapes. So that's what I eventually started to do. But you can imagine as you go up the dome and the layer, the courses become less and less horizontal, the bricks just want to fall into the middle of the dome. So you need to keep them in place. And I did that with a stick that I'll show you later on. But also, more importantly, I found this heat mortar. And this stuff is super sticky, comes in buckets pre-mixed, and it was really indispensable in keeping the bricks in place while the mortar dried. So the circular shape of plywood on the bottom is meant as a guideline for the circular shape of the dome, and as well to protect the fire brick underneath the floor of the pizza oven while I'm working on it. Stick there is on a hinge. You can see at the very bottom of it. The hinge swivels around so the stick can go around and also up and down on the hinge, and it just holds the bricks in place while the mortar dries. Actually, the mortar doesn't even really need to dry because that mortar is so awesome. It just holds stuff in place. You need to get the heat mortar that I was using at the beginning of the project at the bottom of the dome, and if I was to do this over again, I would have used exclusively the other stuff in the bucket. It was way stickier and actually held everything in place just perfectly. Way more expensive, but well worth it in the end. You can see the amount of mortar that you use, so it does get pretty expensive. But as you go up the dome, you can see that the bricks would have a tendency to fall in, so you need something to keep them in place. That stick was invaluable, but the mortar was the biggest part of this. Like, the whole project came together because of that mortar. And again, I'll put a link to the mortar and the place that I got it in the description. So at this point, it's just a matter of going around and around, layer by layer, and adding those bricks one at a time. But it was actually kind of fun at this point. I could see the end of the tunnel, and it was starting to come into shape, and it was kind of enjoyable. The closer you get to the top, it hasn't started yet, but the closer you get to the top, the more wedge-shaped the bricks have to become. So as I get to the top, you can actually see that some of the bricks are almost triangular in shape. But that's just part of it. It's just more and more like a puzzle as you get to the top. Some people on some of the videos I've watched spent a lot of time going into the dome and sort of grinding off the extra mortar that you see in the joints there. I didn't bother doing that just because I couldn't imagine spending that much time inside the oven scraping mortar and having all the chunks falling onto my face. And it's really only for aesthetics purposes. I mean, if you look inside my dome, I'm sure it's not as clean looking as some of the other pizza ovens out there, but I couldn't care less. It's not a functional thing. It's not a big deal to me. So anyway, the dome is done. You can see that it's kind of rough looking, but it's all going to be covered with insulation and various layers of different things. The outer arch is starting to be done there. You can't really tell, but the outer arch has a hole in it. You can't see it there either, but the top section of the outer arch is only half bricks. So there's a hole left. You can kind of see as I pan out here. You can see right there, you can see where the hole is that goes up in between. There's the beginning of the chimney, and you can see in the background and a better shot coming up of the insulation that goes over top of the fire brick. That's 1 inch thick times 2 layers. Again, I'll put that in the description. It's a specific type of insulation made not specifically for pizza ovens, but high heat applications. On top of that, we have another layer of insulation, which is vermiculite mixed with cement. So you just slap that stuff on with your hands and form it over the layer of insulation, and eventually it hardens like concrete. It is made of concrete or cement, and then you can face the whole outside with whatever you want. You could leave it like that. I have since put a layer of brick, cut the brick into 1 inch slabs basically, and then just layered the outside so it looks like it's a brick lining on the outside. So that's pretty much it. I mean, we're pretty much done. We still have to pour the top cap of the fireplace. It's been done, but I mean, in these pictures, it hasn't been done. You'll see it at the end. There we go. We're starting to form that. Again, I left a lot of the openings in the brick as void, so the concrete would go down between. You can see some of them are filled with sand, but a lot of them were just left open, and then we poured that. That was a brutal pour because it was fairly high up, so we had to lift the buckets up, and I'm getting too old to be doing that. But anyways, got done, and that's basically where we're at today. The top of the chimney still needs to get finished just to keep the rain out. I've got like just a box that I put on there now. But other than that, there's just a few last little details to take care of. But it's been a fantastic project. We've had it in the backyard for I think 3 years now, and the family loves sitting out at the fire. The neighbors love coming over. As I said earlier, it is a magnet for people, and it's a great excuse to have a party or have a get together, whatever. But most importantly to me, it was something that I wanted to do. I'd never done it before, and to me, when you accomplish something like that, it is just something to be proud of, and it's something to look out at every day and just realize that I did it with my own hands, and that's kind of meaningful to me.